Fire in a Hole Podcast presents Montreal Comic Con.
So Marco, Rudy, how's it going?
It's fine. How are you guys?
We're doing good. I mean, we're just getting started, really. I know that things are in full swing over here, but how does it feel? Did you come last year?
Yeah, I do the show pretty much every year.
Does it feel, I don't know about you, it feels like it's bigger this time.
Yes, a bit more crowded. Yeah, absolutely, yes.
So did you get the table you wanted? Are you happy with your location?
Pretty much all the time I got good. I'm very well treated here, so it's fine. Yeah.
Did you get a reaction to your cover, to your cloud, like your art that you did for the official poster?
Oh yes, people. A lot of people notice it after they see the thing on here, like the print here. Like, oh, you're the person that. Yeah. From the subway. I'm like, yes, exactly. From the metro stations.
Yeah, I mean that's the interesting thing is like inadvertently you were the best advertised of all the artists here.
Pretty much, they should have posted on the poster, drawn by person.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like you would have had to pay like hundreds of thousands of dollars to get that kind of citywide coverage.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So apart from obviously chatting with the other artists, like, is there anyone here that you personally wanted to meet?
I wanted to talk to Larry Hama. I talked to him a little bit, and if I can find, I don't know, I'm gonna sneak out, try to find Danny Trejo in a washroom.
That's where you would want to run into him, or not. I'm not sure. Maybe that's the worst case scenario or the best case scenario.
Yeah, because it's probably the only time that I can talk to him.
So what do you want to ask Danny Trejo?
Because his story of life is fucking amazing. So I would want to just talk to him a little more about that because it's very inspiring. Okay. Yeah.
So he's kind of like a success story wrapped into a like hardship story wrapped into a like unlikely hero.
Absolutely, like from the worst situation to the best, from being in prison to being in Hollywood.
Yeah, I guess that would definitely be the worst place to start.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's pretty cool.
What about the other artists? Is there anyone else here that like you haven't seen before?
I hadn't seen before the Don Rosa. I didn't even think he was alive, to be honest. So
yeah, that's one of the best things about cons in general.
I just happened to sit beside him. That was super cool. But yeah, that's about it. Yeah.
All right, so Montreal Comic Con, and now we're talking to Mr. Andy Belanger.
Hi, how are you guys?
We're doing great, Andy. We were supposed to catch up to you the other day for the pre-hype episode, but as we've documented, you've had some car trouble.
Yeah, I got stranded out in the Eastern Townships. My Honda blew a cylinder in the engine, and so we scrapped it, but now I'm driving a sweet new TJ.
Okay, well, that's, there's a upside, there's a sunny side to the story. Did you actually know what was wrong with your vehicle?
I knew it was the engine for sure.
Generally, if it's not rolling.
Yeah, there was like no power, then there was power, then it was kind of like coughing, and you're like, that's...
It's the death throes.
Yeah. When you feel it that major, it's like, it's not the exhaust, it's not the clutch, it was the engine.
Definitely the engine. So, how many Comic Cons is this for you?
In my life?
Yeah.
I don't know. I got to be somewhere around 500 or 600, 700. I don't know.
Okay, so you've done a bunch of them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Do you clearly like doing them?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the business, right? Visible for the fans, be here for the fans, and I get to see my friends that don't live in town. So it's, Montreal's always been a awesome place for comics. For me, it's the artists. There's always, like, fantastic artists at this show. And this year particularly is really cool because it's a lot of my really close friends like Carl, Yannick, Mike Cho, Nick Bradshaw. Yeah, it's my posse. Carrie Nord. This is my posse.
This is another thing that's quintessentially Montreal, right? Is if you just with enough introductions, you tie everyone. It's like a video game, sandbox video game. Fog of War pushes back, and you figure out you accidentally know 8 other people that know.
Oh, yeah. I love that about Montreal. There's a stronger sense of community here. I lived in Toronto for years, and it's very tight-knit. Like in Toronto, if you make comics, you hang out with comic book people. But in Montreal, I'll hang out with chefs and actors and musicians and the whole thing is way more connected and a lot more interesting as far as culture goes.
Yeah, and good nightlife too, I guess.
Amazing nightlife. The nightlife here is awesome.
I guess it's like it's more laid back and stuff. You can talk to each other, hear each other talk, I guess.
Oh yeah, completely. Just communication here is great.
Okay, so just speaking of which, so let's move towards your work actually. What did you bring? Did you bring anything special this time around?
Well, I'm working on a bunch of projects at the moment. I was working for Ubisoft all year with some Far Cry stuff, and I have some Southern Cross here from Image Comics that I'm working on. I have a secret project I'm working on, but I have a whole bunch of new prints available, and
I'm seeing some synthwave retro type stuff going on.
yeah, that's kind of the work I do at Ubisoft, is very sort of like retro 80s synthwave sort of music. I animated the trailer for Blood Dragon.
I was going to say, you must have been involved with Blood Dragon. By the way, amazing.
Yeah, I was the principal animator on that. Yeah, and it's pretty fantastic. So a lot of the stuff that I do in Southern Cross is very sort of like retro 80s synthwave.
That's amazing. I literally discovered synthwave like a year ago, and I'm mostly a metalhead, but it's like somehow it goes together. I don't know why.
Yeah, it really does. I think it's just the sound sort of like fits together. I'm the same way. I'm a huge metalhead, and when I did Blood Dragon, I think it was Power Glove did the soundtrack, and then right after that, tons of synthwave creators were coming at me.
Asking for art?
Asking for art, yeah. I've done a bunch of Mega Drive covers. I met like guys like Laserhawk and some other stuff. So you get to start meeting these people, and it's super cool. I just bought I don't know if I can say this on the air, but a new album by Judge Bitch came out this week.
Yes, I did.
And I'm freaking out over that album.
I'm all over it.
Animals, I think it's like Animals with Weapons or something like that. I'm like so in love with that track, and Trash Pandas is amazing. I like, for what I do, the kind of art I make, I love having it on in the background when I work. Fits together really, really nicely. So, I'm really pumped on that album.
Is there some sort of Blood Dragon Part 2 possibly happening?
Well, they did a Blood Dragon Part 2 that was like a motocross game. And as far as I know, that's it. Like, as far as that.
But the reception was good.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Synthwave's not going away, I think.
No, Synthwave's not going away. People are digging it, so it's going to stick around.
So we're here with it's Keon, right? Yeah, Keon, yeah. Yeah, it's your first time here in Montreal Comic Con, I believe, right?
I was there in 1992,
Okay.
but I don't remember much about it.
You were sort of the part of that whole Image 90s sort of generation.
Part of the Exodus.
And you went on and you did Pit.
Leaving the Hulk, and then I went on. I created my own character called Pit. Thanks. Jim Lee was the guy who actually. So many different. What I actually wanted to do back in is because I was really I was sort of obsessed with pit bulls, the dog.
Right.
What if I created a character that's sort of like a version, like a humanoid version of a pit bull, like really tough? But I said I'll exaggerate that. So he's like, he's obviously an alien, so very hard to kill. So there was some Hulk influence, there was some Wolverine influence, Pitbull influence, and there was also some Lobo influence, because I really liked all the detail that Simon Bisley would put in the drawing. So the first book was actually, when they scanned the line art, it didn't really work because there was too much detail. So when they scanned it, it all kind of fell apart. What's weird about that is a lot of people like that. So I thought I wasn't being clean enough, but all of a sudden people go, they kind of like that rough look. So, I have never been able to reproduce it because the scanning's better now. I've worked with writers, so I know I'm not a writer. That's proof of it. Like Peter David's a writer, and I've worked with Steve Gerber, who's a writer, and lots of other writers. Jeff Loeb, a great writer. So I'm basically just sort of emphasizing my strengths, which is like all of the action, It's like watching a big action movie, But if I had another writer, I'd probably go a little bit more cerebral. But I don't know if I'm capable of that.
Will we see Pit again at some point?
Oh, that is the $60,000 question. You never know. There's some talks in bringing Pitt back in some capacity, but nothing really fleshed out at this point. But I'm telling you, I would love to do him again.
Your notoriety came from working on Incredible Hulk for how many years was that?
That was probably 3. I want to say 3. It might have been more. Might have been less.
Yeah, and the whole Hulk thing, that was sort of like, you sort of, did you feel you sort of pigeonholed you into doing the big guys all the time? Or is it something you just love to do?
I guess there's a certain amount of pigeonholing, but I don't mind it. It's harder for me to capture, like to draw real people, obviously, because a lot of artists say when you draw a monster, you really have nothing to compare it to, you know? Unless you're trying to like draw a perfect version of Godzilla, and then people will notice if it's different. But yeah, with human beings, it's there's so many artists here that draw just people so good. It's really I'm going to do my best and hope for the best.
You did a great issue story arc with Doctor Strange and Namor.
Yeah, that was like early on, right? That was the Grey Hulk. I've got to do in one series with the Grey Hulk, then the Green Hulk, and then Professor Hulk, which I kind of helped design.
Yeah, for sure. And when Peter David presented you with that Professor Hulk idea, so he let you completely...
Well, basically, at the time, John Romita was their art.
Oh, okay.
And he sort of gave me some... he just kind of drew up a mock-up of what the Hulk should look like, sort of the Professor Hulk should look like, and I took that and I did my own version of it. John Romita Sr. was a big help in sort of giving me pointers. Like, he would pass them through the editor, and he would give me pointers on how to draw certain things, because, he knows. If anybody knows, John Romita Sr. knows.
Exactly. And we sort of, we chatted about this over the weekend. There's possibly a little hint of that maybe happening in the MCU.
That's right, yeah. If you look at YouTube, there's a lot of theories about Professor Hulk, right?
Yeah, exactly. And have people come up to you often asking you if is this going to happen?
No, I had to bring it up. The thing is, I'm probably spreading a rumor that's wrong. It's probably just one of those things they're throwing out there to throw people off. You never know. But it makes sense that it would be the Professor Hulk.
I think we would love to see it. Yeah.
Well, because they had a miniature in the movie. They had a miniature version of what Peter and I did, where he's fighting with himself. You don't know which Hulk wants to be in charge, and the whole hypnosis thing, and then Dr. Samson, and then they're doing that inside the Hulkbuster armor, like little versions of that, And
I even sort of loved back in the day when you had him in his like lab coat, and he had like a slick back hair. Yeah, that was like those pages were just like.
Yeah, that's a really weird look for him.
It's just so cool having like a big, huge dude like that, like doing science.
I just figured Professor Hulk would probably have some kind of product in his hair.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe some gel. Savage Hulk doesn't care anything about his hair.
Yeah, for sure.
Professor Hulk would care.
Yeah. Who were some of your artistic influences growing up?
Oh my God! When I was younger, Herb Trimpe, that was the Hulks. I had a whole stack of Herb Trimpe Hulks, and they didn't have covers on them because they were returnable. So we dumpster dive, and I have a lot of those books, and I'm still once when I see the actual cover now, I'm like, oh, so that's what the cover looked like. And then of course when I actually started buying comic books was Sal Buscema and Joe Staton. Joe Staton is amazing. You know what Joe Staton did? He actually, I had mentioned I loved those issues, and he somehow found my address and sent me one of the pages, the inked pages from Hulk 201, I think. Amazing. He just did that because he knew I liked his inking.
Sal Buscema.
Sal Buscema and Joe Staton was the inker.
Phenomenal.
Joe Staton had that page and he sent
Yeah.
I still have it as my cherished possession.
Wow. And some of the others?
Oh, okay. Sal Buscema, and then of course. There's a couple of other artists in there, but because I collected so much of Sal Buscema's Hulks. And then I guess later on, I didn't really collect anymore. I was a musician, I played music. And then one day, I think I was even on the road, and we had like a little break. I went into a store, and I saw John Byrne's Fantastic Four. I can't remember what issue it was. He'd been doing it for about a year. And I was like in the store, getting like a drink or something. I looked over, what? I had to pick it up. And then I started collecting again. John Byrne's Fantastic Four. John Buscema's. And then he eventually did like a bunch of Avengers. Oh, so good.
I think everybody, John Byrne's Fantastic Four.
I really haven't stopped since. That was it. And then I started drawing more because of it.
I believe I've seen you do some really awesome Superman stuff too. Like
I'm not really that happy with my Superman. I was trying to make it look like Ed McGuinness, almost a subconscious thing. And I thought, why? I just do it the way I did, just draw it the way I draw it. But it was too late. I already finished it.
Suppose we should bring it up. We just lost Steve Ditko. Well, how was his impact on you?
Well, I mean,
or did
all of the Golden Age guys had an impact. I mean, but it wasn't until later I started discovering guys like Ditko and Kirby, guys, and I really started because I wasn't really collecting comic books in the '60s, but later on I discovered how amazing those guys are. How much work they do, how great, how consistent it was. So I respect those guys so much. They did so much work, more work than I've ever done.
You mentioned you were into music and stuff like that. How has music sort of blended into your art, or has it?
Well, I mean, it's a lot of times when I draw, I have music on, like heavy metal music, and also sort of like I like Mudvayne, and bands like that. So I usually have, not all the time. Sometimes I'll just have a podcast on in the background. But usually I love music. Heavy music. I like soundtrack. There's on YouTube I found the Blade Runner soundtrack, the new one. It's pretty good. It's sounds they get, eh?
It is. It's a really good.
Also, there's a lot of stuff like that, like soundtracks that when you're drawing, it's almost like you're making a movie because the soundtrack's in the background.
Are you familiar with synthwave?
Yeah, synthwave.
Like I work on synthwave all the time. I don't know. There's different types. There's like heavier types. There's lighter types. There's more Miami sound. But I find that, especially a guy who's pushing 40, like it's enough of the old days, right? And it's neutral enough that it like lyrics. I don't know for you. Do lyrics interfere with your work? Like if you hear somebody singing, does that bother you? Or?
Necessarily. I mean, I don't care because I'm not really focusing on it. It's just like background mood music, heavy. Trashy.
That would make sense with like I'm like picturing you listening to like I don't know like a Slipknot and doing like a Pit panel or something.
Yeah, wow, I have.
Cool. So we're here with Nick Spencer from the world of comics, mostly Marvel Comics for the last quite a few years.
Yeah.
And,
Thanks for having me.
I mean, basically, you crafted probably one of the most controversial Captain America story arcs.
That's definitely true.
Yeah, definitely. How was that entire experience for you, man?
Well, it was an interesting experience for sure. I wasn't surprised in a lot of ways. We knew when.
Just so we're clear, it's the
yeah, we should tell folks.
The famous Steve Rogers storyline where he became an agent of Hydra.
Yeah, the big Hail Hydra moment.
Yeah, and the classic Hail Hydra moment that was all over everywhere. There's like 1,000 memes, and I think I saw like everything from Ronald McDonald to like Colonel Saunders.
One of my proudest moments.
Yeah, and but I mean, it was different. It was something that
it got people talking. It got people excited. That's part of our job. When you do something like that people are going to get upset.
Yeah.
People care about these characters. They're very passionate about them. So none of it was terribly surprising.
Yeah.
But ultimately, for us, we know, that's part of our job is to get people talking and get people excited about the stories that we're telling. And B, that once it's underway, it's time to execute our game plan, time to execute the story that we want to tell. And so it's at a certain point you kind of block that stuff out and focus on doing what you set out to do.
Yeah.
So it was it was certainly a unique experience in my career.
Yeah.
I don't know that anything will ever top that. We'll see, I guess.
Yeah.
But it was a crazy thing to be a part
And I
of.
mean, I believe they sort of toyed with Captain America going bad a few times, like way back in the day.
It's a recurring theme in his stories that he's either brainwashed or programmed, or there's some imposter that takes over the suit. it's a recurring theme because Captain America as a symbol has so much power.
Yeah.
That more than any other superhero, really, seeing somebody else or seeing a corrupted version in that costume is a very terrifying thing. It
Right.
instantly makes the story kind of a high stakes moment. So there's a reason why creators on the book kind of keep revisiting that as a concept.
Yeah. For me, at the same time, you putting Sam Wilson in the Captain America costume, that was surprisingly one of the most refreshing things, and some of the most refreshing comics that I've read
in
quite a long time. And that comic series, specifically Sam Wilson Captain America, dealt with so many pressing, awesome political issues, and
that's some of the Marvel work that I'm the most proud of.
Yeah.
Really is the Sam Wilson Captain America book. I think that book had a lot of heart and was trying to, capture a moment in time and where the world was at that time, and tried to speak to issues in a way that a Marvel superhero comic can.
Right.
I love Sam so much as a character. In the position that he was put in as Captain America.
Yeah.
Kind of what I thought would happen to Sam if he were to assume that identity. That was a story that I was really passionate about.
And what was really great about it was that the theme of the comic actually reflected what was going on in a weird way in the United States with the political climate.
To an almost surreal extent at times.
Almost at a surreal extent.
We work pretty far ahead, and at times it was a really, really strange experience to see how it lined up with but that's a big part of what we do at Marvel. We always call it the world outside your window. We want Marvel to reflect that. One of the big differences between Marvel and DC is Marvel comics are set in our universe.
Right.
that it's New York City, and that whoever's president for us is president in the Marvel universe. Things like that. And, I've always really, really loved that. And we wanted to lean into that in that book. It was also a love song to. I grew up with Mark Grunwald on Captain America, and the run was very much a love song to that run, and trying to reconnect with that, and doing it through a little bit of a modern lens, and seeing how people would take that kind of book now was a fascinating thing.
Yeah. And I suppose Marvel was really behind you with all what you're doing and everything, and
Marvel were really supportive. They were really excited about the story, and certainly when I pitched, everything that happened with Steve, they were very excited about that story, and that's something that I really love about working there is, they're not afraid to take big chances.
Definitely,
they're not afraid of internet backlash or stuff like that. They. If they believe in a story, they want to tell it, and they stick to it. And I really admire them for that.
And now you're working with Spider-Man, which is sort of a whole different,
very different thing.
For you excited?
But that was what was so interesting about it was really before Cap, I think a lot of folks were reading my stuff. Thought of me as a comedy writer and thought of me as because of Superior Foes and Ant-Man and the Fix.
Yeah.
That they kind of thought of me as somebody that wrote that kind of work. So then when Cap starts, I was like the political writer.
Yeah.
Now I'm in a book that is certainly less political. And certainly has a little more comedy again, not quite as much as a Superior Foes or an Ant-Man, but still a pretty fair amount.
I was going to ask if you were sort of going to, with who's the mayor right now in the Marvel Universe in New York City, reminds me of somebody. I was sort of wondering if you were going to sort of.
I mean, what I can say is, Kingpin will be a key part of our story, and Wilson Fisk is currently the mayor of New York, which I was so excited about Charles Soule doing that story over in Daredevil, and immediately asked, if we could do some Spidey stuff involving that. And, they were very gracious in sharing him there, and I love Kingpin as a character, and
Yeah.
certainly to get to do a story of Fisk as mayor. There's a lot of great story possibilities in that,
Yeah.
so I'm excited.
For sure, man. I'm really excited. And obviously, Ryan Otley must be amazing to work with.
I'm just over the moon to be working with Ryan. He's such a phenomenal artist, a gifted storyteller. He's also a very nice guy and a great collaborator. So we are having so much fun on the book together. Yeah.
So, Montreal Comic Con, we have Mr. Jerry Conway with us. Tremendous honor for us. I'm really trying to restrain the fanboy in me. I say what I always say to someone I meet that I really admire, and that's that your work has been a huge impact.
Well, that's very gratifying to hear. You know.
I think to a lot of people, I described it like I actually wrote down the questions here. I hope you'll forgive me if I read from it. And I said, your writing has basically been like a Pink Floyd record playing in the background of our childhoods, teenage years, challenging us, inspiring us, making us laugh, exhilarating us through the decades. G.I. Joe, Conan, Spider-Man, Perry Mason, which I remember as a child watching.
Wow.
And so much more. So as a storyteller, do you see any kind of pattern or unifying themes to your work?
I think that's a hard question for me to answer, but I think there are stories that I keep coming back to, and mostly those are stories about discovering personal dealing with personal guilt, dealing with personal grief, trying to answer the internal questions that haunt you,
Okay.
But I don't. I'm self-conscious about it enough so that I'm not that aware.
Right. I mean, and you don't want to be too aware either, right?
Right.
Because then there's the fear of self-parody and such things.
Yeah, which I'm very good at. So.
Yeah. And writing is something that's, I mean, you've written for how many years now, if you have to think about it?
50 years professionally this year.
Okay, so
Yeah,
that's
easy to remember because it was June. I think it was June. No, I think I sold my first story to DC Comics to Murray Boltinoff for Tales of the Unexpected in August of 1968. So,
wow, that's great.
It's going to be 50 years in a couple of months.
That's great. That's just 10 years before I was born. And I'm usually the oldest guy in the room, so that feels great. I feel like a kid again just for a little while. That's great. So, of all the characters in the comics that you have create, I mean, obviously, the Punisher is now more popular than ever with the successful run on Netflix. The Punisher's roots have been traced back to Mac Bolan from the Executioner novels, John Rambo, maybe a little Paul Kersey from Death Wish. I don't know if you would see those elements in there.
And let's not forget Dirty Harry.
Dirty Harry, I was going to mention. Harry Callahan, definitely. There's a piece of him there.
That was part of the zeitgeist at the time. I mean, characters like Boland and the Executioner are similar to the pulp characters of the 30s, like the Shadow and the Phantom Detective, and various vigilantes. And we hadn't really, while Batman was a kind of a vigilante character, and all the superheroes are vigilante characters, we had not really done a character that was pure classic street vigilante type.
Right.
And those characters like Callahan and Executioner and Rambo were certainly part of that zeitgeist.
Yeah, initially, yeah. I mean, maybe I'm off here, but Punisher specifically always seemed to me like it was at once kind of an indictment of war and the follies of war, while also catering to that sort of eternally present secret fantasy for vigilante justice that's always been present.
And the trap in that is that I mean, as I always try to remind people, is that the Punisher is the bad guy in the first appearance, and his desire to, quote, clean the streets and to take care of the bad guys is actually manipulated by an even worse bad guy, which is the Jackal. It's only when he realizes that he's been manipulated that he turns away from trying to kill our protagonist. Uh-huh. So my feeling at the time was that this need for a vigilante, this desire for a vigilante, was a double-edged sword, And that's what I wanted to express. You know,
to explore that.
Yeah, and to varying degrees, that message has been emphasized or de-emphasized over the decades since.
Right. I mean, that's kind of the big question, you know, is that you create it for one reason in the social context at times, and then what does he become? He's still relevant for the same reasons we don't know. I mean, war certainly hasn't gone anywhere.
No.
Justice, I mean, maybe New York isn't as seedy and as it used to be.
Yeah, you don't need a Punisher today.
Right. The character Firestorm was actually the reason I personally picked up a DC comic for the first time, because I was caught in this foolish Marvel versus DC thing when I was a kid. I thought I had to pick a side.
Right. Everybody is in that at one point or another.
Right. We had the Sega Nintendo. We had the Marvel versus... Right. So, but he, of course, the fact that he had fire for hair was the first thing that caught my eye. But very quickly... so I grew up with a father, and the very unique duality of Ronnie and Martin Stein, it kind of, I don't know, I saw this bonding experience between a father figure and a youth. Was that there, or did I see it?
Yes, I mean, a lot of what creators do is subconscious, you know, and we're all tapping into an archetype of some kind or other that we're trying to, that we use to reflect whatever internal drama we're trying to portray. But I knew when I was putting that book together, when I was creating that character, I knew that I wanted a couple of elements, and that then led to the dynamic that you're describing. I wanted a young hero who wasn't a Peter Parker, you know, wasn't the bright kid, wasn't the smartest kid in his class, wasn't a natural hero, but was, you know, kind of an ordinary guy who would probably be overwhelmed in any given situation, make bad choices, and, you know, be kind of foolish. But at the same time, he had to act heroically. I wanted to have this mentoring aspect of it, which would allow me to have that dialogue, and then that in itself, you know, provided that dynamic that you're now describing, which is the father-son relationship. And I realized, not when I was doing it, but in reflection, that it's an archetype, which is the voice inside any adolescent that is the voice of their parents, the voice of mature society, trying to tell them what to do, you know, and the struggle between that childish impulse to do what I want to do no matter what, and the more mature part of your mind that's saying, well, maybe that's not a good idea.
Right.
And it was a happy accident, but I think it really did reflect a fundamental archetype that people responded to.
I think so, definitely. And they kind of both had something to contribute, right?
Oh, yeah,
Ronnie
absolutely.
had the brashness, the courage.
Yeah, and they couldn't do it, neither one of them could do it without the other, which
as
is
we
also,
learn later.
Yeah, absolutely
okay.
important.
My final question is, Alan Moore.
Alan Moore.
Yes, has often been quoted as saying that adaptations are mostly unnecessary, or they're somewhat corrupt as a practice. He considers them a bit of a cynical sort of cash grab, that every story should remain in its original format. At least that's been repeated here and now.
You should tell that to William Shakespeare.
To William Shakespeare, exactly.
Who was the ultimate adapter.
There you go. Exactly. And we're all adapting in some fashion, of course.
Yeah.
But as a person whose works and ideas have been adapted and continually are adapted over the decades, how do you feel about it? How do you feel about adaptation?
Oh, I'm flattered by it. I mean, I don't hold that an adaptation has anything to do necessarily with the work that inspired it. I mean, in many cases, what you're seeing is an interpretation, you know, of material that already exists. There's a great story that's credited to James Cain, who wrote the novel Double Indemnity, that became, you know, a fairly famous film noir. And Cain was asked at one point, what do you think about what Hollywood has done to your novels? And he said, well, they haven't done anything to my novels. They're right over there on the shelf. You know, the adaptation is a separate thing. To me, it's an acknowledgement that you created something that was worthy of interpretation and imitation. and that's flattering. So I'm always happy to see it.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Cosplay would maybe also
Absolutely
be part of that. It's definitely
it's a tribute. I think obviously there's cash involved because we are there, but there was cash involved in the original creation.
Right. Yeah, we live in a capitalist system.
Nobody writes and creates a comic book for free. So if you're willing to have been paid for your work in the first place, why should you be offended that somebody else wants to be paid for your work in the second place?
Well,
I don't get it.
I'm really glad to hear you say these things about the way you feel about adaptation, because that's primarily how the reason I wanted to say hello to you personally is because a few years back we did a fan film on Punisher that John Bernthal also ended up seeing way before when he was preparing for his role, and you even were nice enough to reach out to us and say hello, and we really appreciate that, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, personally, just as somebody that I want to eventually write comics and get into that industry, do you have any sort of insight or tips as to?
Well, I can't speak specifically to the industry as it is today because I haven't broken into it. I mean, I work in it, but I've already established myself, so I don't have that insight. But I will say this, that creating anything is something that you decide to do, and whether it gets published or not is irrelevant. I'm not saying that it's irrelevant financially. I mean, it's obviously financially relevant.
Yeah.
But from a creative point of view, wanting to do something and then executing it and making it happen is up to you. Mm-hmm. And whether someone else appreciates it, as I mentioned on the panel, I did not feel appreciated as a comic book creator until almost seriously until about 10 or 15 years ago. So I still did it, and I pushed and wanted to do it for my own personal reasons. Mm-hmm. I mean, there were financial reasons, but there were also, creative and emotional reasons that drove me to do it. And I would say if you have the passion to create something and you put that passion into the work, ultimately that should be its own reward, but that passion will then inspire other things to happen. I'm a firm believer in what I call stirring the pot, which is nothing happens unless you're stirring the pot. And you do stuff and you create stuff and you put stuff out there, and eventually it gets found, discovered, and develops a life of its own. Yeah. My wife's someone who I deeply admire because about 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, before I met her, she had been working as an accountant for most of her adult life, and through I don't know how it happened or why she did it, she started doing a web series that she wrote with someone else directing, and over the last 5-6 years, they've got 40,000 subscribers and 4 or 5 million views on this web series.
Wow.
Yeah, and she has fans, people writing in, talking, commenting, and all of it.
Do you mind if we ask what it's called?
It's called The Vamps Next Door. It's a very hokey, very funny sitcom-y type show about vampires living in suburbia, and it starts out very ragged, with not very much skill sets involved, but by the time it's reached its current form, it is really well developed. And this is something where she had always wanted to do it. She had always wanted to be creative, but she hadn't allowed herself to be. And once she allowed herself to be, it flowers and it grows and it takes on a life of its own. So everybody should just do what you want to do.
It's a path.
Yeah, it's a path. There's no guarantee that at the end of it there's going to be a success, but that's not relevant. The relevant part is doing what you want to do. Ultimately, that's the only thing you have power over.
That's phenomenal.
And that's a lot of power.
Obviously, you're still writing to this day.
Yeah.
And how has your process changed over the years?
I'm much more careful.
Yeah.
I think things through probably more than I did.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was working in comics in the 70s and 80s, I was making a living doing it, and I had to write a lot in order to make a living. So I didn't have the time to process fully my intentions on books. I was working from issue to issue, sometime month to month, developing stories as I went along. And planning things out was not my strong suit. So these days I plan things out much more.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for the conversation.
Great.